Tonight on Nova, the search for the Northwest Passage has for centuries doomed iron men and wooden ships. The 1845 Franklin expedition ended in puzzling tragedy. 3 years after setting sail, his men lay dying 1,000 miles off course. Now bodies of his crew have been discovered, frozen and almost perfectly preserved.
He's been autopsied.
He's been autopsied. Oh!
Nova follows a team of scientists as they uncover startling evidence that may reveal the true fate of the Franklin expedition and the strange malady that befell it. Will the final chapter of this 140-year-old Arctic mystery be found here, buried in ice?
Major funding for Nova is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. Additional funding was provided by the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying healthcare products worldwide. And by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials.
Iron men and wooden ships, a description of heroism never more apt than when applied to those who brave the Arctic. Up to the early part of the 20th century, the major focus of Arctic exploration was the Northwest Passage. For over 300 years, European explorers saw the passage as a possible route to the rich markets of the Orient. By 1800, they realized that the passage was too treacherous to serve as an economic east-west thoroughfare. But Britain, the greatest sea power of the time, pressed onward, moving ever deeper into unknown territory. By the 1840s, the push to complete the charting of the Northwest Passage had become a powerful national obsession. Here on Beechey Island, at the upper reaches of the passage, are the graves of 3 ordinary sailors, doomed by extraordinary circumstances. To modern-day scientific explorers, these graves are time capsules, a window into the lives and deaths of men who challenged the Arctic, and into a compelling mystery until now frozen in time. In May of 1845, the British Admiralty commissioned the 58th and it was hoped final charting of the Northwest Passage. The naval ships HMS EREBUS and TERROR were equipped with bows of reinforced iron, powered with converted locomotive engines, and crewed by 129 men. Sir John Franklin, captain of the Erebus and leader of the effort, was at 59 a veteran of 2 overland expeditions in the North American Arctic. James Fitzjames was second in command of the Erebus. Francis Crozier was captain of the sister ship, HMS Terror. The Franklin expedition was last seen 2 months after departure, moving in Lancaster Sound, north of central Canada in the Arctic archipelago. According to a recovered document, the Erebus and Terror circumnavigated Cornwallis Island and wintered off Beechey, a tiny island to its east. In early summer of 1846, Franklin steered his ships in a southwesterly direction toward King William Island. Since his maps indicated that King William was unpassable on the eastern side, Franklin stayed to the west. By September of 1846, the 2 vessels were hopelessly entrapped in pack ice, 15 miles from King William Island. There was to be no spring thaw that year, nor the next. In June of 1847, at the age of 61, Sir John Franklin died. By the 22nd of April, 1848, 8 other officers and 15 crewmen were dead. "105 desperate survivors fled the ships, dragging 3 lifeboats laden with prayer books, cutlery, curtain rods, plates, even a writing desk. The sailors trekked down the coast of King William Island, hoping to make their escape to a Hudson Bay post 1,000 miles to the south. The death march lasted from spring to winter. In their final days, some fed on the bodies of dead comrades. Unwittingly, the last of the Franklin crew did succeed in traversing the final stretch of the Northwest Passage. Their legacy, a pathetic trail of bones, ended on the south coast of Simpson Strait, known today as Starvation Cove. Why did 24 men, including Franklin himself, die before the ships were abandoned? And why did the survivors drag heavy, useless cargo on a 1,000-mile trek southward, especially since they knew that well-stocked whaling ships frequented the north end of the passage? Owen Beattie of the University of Alberta is well known in Canada for his work in forensic anthropology. Because of his fascination with the Franklin mystery, he has taken several trips to the high Arctic, beginning in 1981 with a trip to King William Island to collect bone samples.
This place is often referred to as Crozier's Landing, and what this represents is the point on King William Island where the 105 surviving Franklin crewmen congregated after abandoning the ships, which were located 5 leagues north-northwest of here in late April of 1848. And what we have behind me here is their campsite. It's made up of around 13 tent circles, and if you walk around this site today, you can find scattered over the site a lot of artifacts from that time period, 1848. Very little is left, but you can see throughout the structure, you can see bone, metal, and wood.
All of these forlorn remnants were of interest to Beattie, but he would need human bones to apply his specialty. He brought samples back to his lab, where he began to examine their biological and chemical composition. He compared these to other examples he had of bones from Eskimos, Inuits who lived during this same time period.
The biological information we're looking for is evidence of health, disease, and other evidence for bone alterations. But there's another perspective to look at in bone material like this, and that's what makes up the bone. And we submitted small bone fragments for trace element analysis. And the results initially were very interesting to me, but I didn't pick up on perhaps the possible significance. And the results related to, among other elements that are present in the bone, and is the presence of lead. And in the one Franklin individual, the lead levels were in the order of 220 to 230 parts per million. And in comparison, the Inuit materials from, remember, the same time period are about 1/10 the amount. And the thoughts were multiple here. Was this something that reflected the lead exposures of this one individual, or could it have been a more expansive problem that may have been shared by some of the other expedition members?
Beattie's suspicion that lead poisoning may have contributed to the demise of the Franklin expedition sprang from knowledge of what lead can do to the body and mind. It can cause paralysis of the muscles, excruciating pain in the limbs, anorexia, colic, neuroses, disorientation, inflammation of the nerves or brain. Was it possible that mental disturbances, disorientation, and an inability to judge time and space could have made 1,000 miles seem a short distance and turned ornate, inedible objects into reasonable cargo for a desperate journey? It had long been known that there were 3 graves on Beechey Island from sailors who died early in the expedition. In 1984, Beattie and his team traveled to Beechey to investigate one of the graves, that of Petty Officer John Tarrington of the HMS Terror. The findings were staggering. John Torrington's body was almost perfectly preserved. The samples taken revealed that the body's lead levels, though not as high as that in the bones of the sailors found on King William, were still 5 times higher than Inuit bones from the same time period. Could it be that the lead intake over the course of the expedition slowly poisoned the unwary sailors? And if so, where was the lead coming from? Beattie's hypothesis about lead poisoning was rapidly taking shape, but the samples were too limited to be conclusive. Beattie felt his findings warranted a return to Beechey Island and a detailed investigation and exhumation of the 2 remaining bodies.
For just one time, I would take the Northwest Passage to find the hand of Franklin reaching for the Beaufort Sea, tracing one warm line through a land so wide and savage, and make a Northwest Passage to the sea. Westward from the Davis Strait is there 'twas said to lie the sea route to the Orient, for which so many died, seeking gold and glory, leaving weathered, broken bones, and a long-forgotten, lonely cairn of stones. For just one time, I would take the Northwest Passage to find the hand of Franklin reaching for the Beaufort Sea, tracing one warm line through a land so wide and savage, and make a Northwest Passage to the sea.
Owen Beattie's research permit is for just over 2 weeks. Ultimately, it will take 2 small planes and 3 tons of equipment to provide everything and everyone required for an on-site medical investigation, much more extensive than was possible during Beattie's previous expedition. In the meantime, the advance group moves quickly to set up camp and secure the eating and sleeping tents. The weather is unpredictable here, with constant winds which can assume hurricane velocity in a matter of minutes. This desolate island, 900 nautical miles from the North Pole, hundreds of miles north of the Canadian coast, would be both home and laboratory for Beattie and his team. Before exhumation work begins, he has time to reacquaint himself with Beechey Island, retracing the footsteps of more than a century of fellow searchers. In 1848, 3 years after Franklin's disappearance, the British Admiralty launched the most massive search effort in the history of Arctic exploration. Over the first decade, there were 12 missions sent from Britain and the United States. At one point, there were 10 rescue ships moored here at the same time.
Off in the distance there, we can see Cape Riley. That's the location where the very first signs of the Franklin expedition were found in August of 1850. And within a matter of a few hours, this particular cairn here was seen also, and a large number of people came up here, and this was quickly dismantled. And it's a large cairn. It would have taken a fair amount of manpower. It was dismantled, of course, looking for an expected document that Sir John Franklin would have left behind here. And it's possible he did, but nothing was found at this location. And this became a focal point for the searches for Franklin, because a few days after the Cape Riley discovery, a group went around Erebus Bay, and the Franklin winter camp and the 3 graves were discovered.
The 2 bodies to be exhumed were from Franklin's ship HMS Erebus. Able-bodied seaman John Hartnell hailed from Brompton, Kent. He died on January 4th, 1846. William Brain was a private in the Royal Marines when he died on April 3rd of the same year. It was likely the promise of double pay drew recruits to the expedition, that and the chance to be a part of the most lauded voyage of the time. Today is June 8th, 1986, the bicentennial year of Franklin's birth. Summer is the only possible time for a disinterment of this nature. Devon Island, across the narrow channel from Beechey, has one of the highest polar bear populations in the Arctic. Rifles and flares are always at the ready.
Get away.
For added protection, a bear dog has accompanied one of the team members, Joe Ely Nunjag from Resolute. Keena's job is to warn the research group if a polar bear should enter the camp. Brian Spenceley is the only new member of Beattie's advance team. Spenceley is related to John Hartnell.
It's about the same as last time now. I'm still overexposing by 2 stops.
A professor of physics in Ontario, Spenceley is also experienced in forensic photography and offered to record the events of the expedition.
I suspect it'll cope with everything that we've got here.
Spenceley's first official duty is to photograph the condition of the grave sites after the removal of the top layers of snow. The photographs will provide a visual record of the site when the time comes to restore it to its original condition, a requirement of Canadian law. Once Spenceley has taken his photographs, project archaeologist Eric Damjar and team member Arne Carlson begin the construction of a grid over the grave of William Brain. Measurements are taken in 3 dimensions so that even the contours of the grave will be accurately recorded for restoration of the site.
That looks good. Okay. So 2 meters, 41. I'm on the surface of a rock here.
Okay, that's all right.
That rock's okay?
Yeah, I'll just
79. We have this corner of a rock. Do you want it mapped in? This is what we call
the headstone.
Yeah.
There is no need to build a grid over the grave of John Hartnell, because detailed archaeological records were taken when Beattie last visited Beechey Island. Hartnell's grave was opened during that summer of 1984, but time did not permit a full exhumation or autopsy.
I love these 80-pound rocks.
Actually, that's, no.
There are few places on Earth as inhospitable as Beechey Island. The ground is gravel, loose limestone shale on the surface, with permafrost below. It is this permafrost which acts as a mummifying agent, preserving, at least partially, any organic matter contained within it. As soon as the surface is cleared, Walt Kowal and the other team members begin the back-breaking work of pickaxing their way through permafrost to Hartnell's coffin. After a few moments, Jim Savell will take over and dig until he, too, is forced to take a break.
Okay, next turn.
As tough as the job is, the scientific team works in summer sunlight, which lasts 24 hours a day, and in cold but tolerable weather. What the Erebus gravediggers had to endure would have been much worse. Hartnell died 3 days after the new year in the depths of an Arctic winter, and the sailors would have worked in almost total darkness.
You have to undercut so that the headstone doesn't fall in the grave.
19th century rescue ships reported evidence of an observatory, a carpenter shop, a forge, a shooting gallery, and a large storehouse. There were also signs that Franklin ships made a hasty escape from Beechey, bound for King William Island, as soon as the pack ice relaxed its grip. The sailors left many useful items behind: gloves, keys, fragments of clothes, as well as one unavoidable legacy: a garbage dump.
Next to the grave site, this has to be the most important part of this particular location. And we think the reason is that the graves and the bodies in the graves and what they're going to tell us connects directly to this site. This is a can dump left here by Franklin. Our theory is, and I think we can confirm it here today, if we look at any of these cans here, we can pick up and see a problem. Here's a beautiful example of a can with inside big lumps of lead tin solder in direct contact with the food. And if you pick up pretty well any piece here, you'll see inside the can a large quantity of solder, and this would have contaminated the food over a period of time while they were stored on the ships, and maybe even when they're reheating of the food in the cans. And I think there's no question here that these cans are an extremely important part of the story.
The expedition carried almost 8,000 lead-soldered cans of preserved meats, soups, vegetables, and other necessities of life. Commander Fitzjames, second in command of the Erebus, disapproved of the selection of Goldner Provisioners as the ship's supplier. Goldner had never before provisioned a naval ship and was awarded the contract solely because of its low bid. In 1852, a search mission funded by Franklin's wife, Lady Jane Franklin, and headed by Commander Inglefield, exhumed John Hartnell's grave. The diggers badly damaged the lid of the coffin and removed the plaque attached to it. Beattie's team members are careful to avoid any further destruction of the aged and fragile wood.
Yeah, that spot there, I think. We can just establish the top. Okay. Use it as reference. There it is, reference. Scored it slightly, but if we can keep that to a minimum. Now,
that
now
blue is really definite.
Okay, now we will just work around this part. So then we've established it's blue,
Yeah.
just like the Torrington's was.
It has taken over 20 hours of steady work to dig down to the coffin of John Hartnell, which is left encased in a layer of frozen gravel. The coffin will not be opened until a second plane load of medical and scientific experts arrives at the site.
There's little bits of this blue cloth everywhere. You should watch for that.
Okay. That may have been from the 1852
Yeah.
excavation.
The crew now turns its attention to the grave of William Braine. The burial of Royal Marine Private William Braine took place in April of 1846, 3 months after that of John Hartnell.
Okay. Perfect. It's a very complicated grave. Some of the rocks look like they've been here a long time. It may not have been dug into by the British when they were here in the 1850s. So really, by moving every one of these rocks here, we really don't know what's underneath or what to expect. And it's unknown even how deep the individual is. If it's following the pattern of Hartnell from the same ship, it will be less than a meter below surface by the top of the coffin, but that's a guess. The fact that it is undisturbed is just a guess at the moment.
You know, and another indication that this thing hasn't been disturbed seems to be that the underside of these rocks are not weathered as much as the upper surface. And it's pretty unlikely that they would have placed all the unweathered surfaces down if they had disturbed this.
Good. What we're doing at the moment is to uncover all these surface features that you can see. We're numbering all the rocks, putting identifications on the rocks so that we can reposition them exactly. And we're reconstructing the site.
That one. It's basically flat. The last one weighed 400 pounds, but I think this one might. Ready? You guys got it? Yeah. And up. Oh, it's not bad. That's it, all right. Just trip and feel it.
Brain's grave is to be ready by day 7 of the expedition, the day the medical staff is due to arrive from the south. As the end of the first week approaches, the effects of 36-hour shifts and constant exertion in bitter weather are beginning to tell on everyone. The cramped quarters are another hardship. Compared to the accommodations provided for Franklin's men, however, the scientists' camp is a luxury resort. While Franklin, Crozier, and Fitzjames enjoyed well-furnished cabins, the common sailors were berthed in what crannies were not taken up with food and equipment. The ships were cold, damp, and infested with rats. Then, as now, polar bears prowled the coastline, completely unpredictable and totally unafraid of anything in their path. As a Royal Marine, one of William Brain's assigned duties would have been to protect the unarmed sailors against attack. On day 6, the diggers accelerate their pace. According to Beattie's timetable, his team of medical specialists should have landed in Resolute before making their final flight into Beechey.
They can only make buildings out of this stuff.
Yeah.
The team members have discovered that Brain's grave was dug at an angle and at twice the depth expected. This means at least another 12 hours of steady work. The plane is right on schedule, but this one has been equipped with skis. Since the plane must land on the ice of Erebus Bay, the crew members will have to haul at least a ton of cargo, much of it delicate medical equipment, across rotten ice, pressure ridges, and loose gravel to the main camp.
Oh, man. We were wondering. Yeah, well, so are we.
Hey, Barb.
Hello, Eric. Nice to see you.
That's a heavy one. Probably goes close to 200.
The first order of business is to get the equipment into what will be the medical tent as quickly as possible and to begin setup of a complete radiology lab, including a dark room for processing negatives. Because this will be the first time radiology equipment has been used for scientific research in such a remote location, the scientists begin by running a series of tests.
That's not going to get wet, is it?
No, that'll be all right. Collimator. Good.
Derek Notman, part of a select medical team from Minneapolis, is a radiologist with considerable experience in the examination of mummified remains. Lawrence Anderson will handle the technical aspects of the X-ray procedure.
Should do it, yeah.
Let's try a 10th at 80. Well, Derek, I think a 10th of a second does better than 2/10.
That one is over-penetrated, isn't it? You can make out the outline there. It's probably good detail if we had a hot light here, but north of the Arctic Circle, we don't have
This
that kind of
is much better as far as general penetration.
This test shot really gives us the information that the technique works.
With the medical people now on Beechey, the exhumation of the first body, John Hartnell, can resume. Pail after pail of warm water must be used to thaw Hartnell's coffin.
a wood fragment found amongst the gravel at the northwest end of the coffin.
The wood fragments scattered in the gravel are pieces of the coffin lid, damaged during Inglefield's 1852 excavation.
What your eyes are drawn to first is this large area of damage. There's two different kinds of damage here, one intentional and one unintentional. The intentional damage was this piece of material that was removed by Inglefield in 1852. You can see the pickaxe marks along the side of the coffin that goes right through the coffin lid to the box.
For now, Barb Schwager, an Arctic clothing specialist, can only observe. But in a matter of hours, she, along with pathologist Roger Amy and the other scientists, will have more than enough to keep them occupied.
This is not in good shape.
No.
It is going to come out, though.
It's not attached anywhere.
Yeah. Foot end out?
Yeah. Joe.
Wow. Look at the discoloration in there. Careful.
Wait right down here. Good.
Well, the water flowed back in, didn't it?
Yep.
Interesting pattern there with the almost, I don't know if it's layers or sort of fingers of ice there.
Right here, yeah.
Well, all of it, it's not just solid.
Okay, that's
his chest.
shroud, yeah. And if we recall, I don't think his face is very far below that.
Nope. Meltwater next.
Yeah, a lot of ice in there.
The team members spend hour after hour collecting snow from around the tents and melting it into warm water. Most of them are plagued with headaches caused by inhaling fumes from the stoves. The heated water is applied in stages to allow the ice to melt slowly and without damage to the body. Even before Hartnell's coffin was reached, a fetid organic smell began to permeate the work tent, raising concerns about the condition of the body. In the final hours of melting, the air of expectancy is almost palpable. Everyone is preparing themselves for their first view of John Hartnell's face.
You can see how his face is desiccated and it's mummified. The soft tissues have diminished in volume. The lips are pulled back.
Already, it's so different than Torrington. It's just a completely different story here.
This is a particularly solemn moment for Brian Spenceley. He alone is meeting an ancestor, gazing at his own family history over a distance of 140 years.
Coming off good? Yep. See if anything is loose here. Nice seam up along the shroud. Now we can just start showing up the shirt. Still some ice there. Still pretty attached. Now, there's something.
Look at that.
Tied, but with a rather complex knot. Why would they make a knot like that? There's the extra thread right there.
Yeah.
It's his shirt has been. It looks like a suture.
It's a pullover shirt, you can see.
Is it? Yeah, there's the lower end of the pullover, and it's sutured too. But it's torn down below. That's been torn.
Yeah.
That's not not seamed. That's torn.
There's the underwear.
And there's the suit. Yeah.
Garment.
Yeah, that's right. He's got long underwear on.
Looks like there's a cut there. See?
Why is it cut? Now let's look up here. He's got a button right there. Nice button.
And a red beard.
It looks red to me. There's his long underwear showing up. Either this shirt has been used, or somebody has cut it for some reason or other. I wonder who's cut it. I wonder if it was done by Inglefield and Sutherland.
Yeah, that's what I was
They
thinking.
could have cut it and then sutured it up in that rough fashion.
That's what I think.
I think you're right.
The Erebus crewmen took great care in creating John Hartnell's resting place. The coffin was made to fit his shrouded body, and a pillow filled with wood shavings was tucked under his head. The dead man, weighing under 100 pounds, was lying on a blanket, and buried in 3 shirts and a wool watch cap. The epitaph chiseled into Hartnell's headboard reads, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways." This stern religious warning seems an odd contrast to the gentle manner in which the body was prepared.
Oh, the skull was 7 tenths, yeah. Double it?
I'll go 100. Try 1.5 at 100.
Notman and Anderson decide to do their first X-rays while the upper body is still clothed. The heavy post-mortem discoloration suggests that there had been some delay in John Hartnell's burial.
So all this stuff here is just clothes.
Some of the initial X-rays are showing peculiar images. What is depicted in the body cavity does not conform with anatomical fact.
Freezing. Cleavage planes inside the body.
Yeah.
But there's no question that the films will be easier to look at once the clothes are off.
Mm-hmm. See, on the head, all we got is just he's a solid block of ice in his head.
There's no sense in jumping off elsewhere. And we're not going to do any other body parts now. We'll let Barb do it for the clothing.
What the hell has he got up in the shoulder? That's metallic.
Oh, hey, wait a minute. It looks almost as though he's got... No, that's interesting. Our first metallic artifact there.
I wonder what that is.
Right up over the right shoulder, and I have no idea. It looks like, if we're seeing it end on, it's a ring. But
what do you think of the right clavicle?
The radiology team decides to let the body thaw further, while Barb Schwager does her initial recording of Hartnell's clothing.
We'll cut the whole thing down the back and pull it all forward.
The major surprise comes when Hartnell's clothes are finally removed.
Son of a bitch. He has been.
Oh, he has. Yeah. He's been autopsied.
He's been autopsied. Oh!
Why incision?
But an upside-down Y.
Yeah.
Now, this sort of thing has never been seen before. This is absolutely unique. Okay, let me just lift him. Can I just get where you are,
Yeah,
Brian?
Hartnell's body had undergone an autopsy in 1846, while it was still aboard the HMS Erebus. Once the autopsy was done, the ship's doctors simply filled the body cavity with loose organs. This explains why the first X-rays were confusing, and also why the odor of decomposition was so much stronger than expected.
Now, you can just stick his arm down and...
The X-rays and autopsy are standard procedures for any post-mortem investigation. What is so different is the great age of the body and the deep sense of privilege felt by every member of the team. While historians have written about the Franklin expedition for over 100 years, here is one of the people who was actually a part of it, released, however briefly, from a frozen time capsule. The exhumed body can only be exposed for the shortest possible length of time due to the accelerated rate of decomposition after thawing. Roger Amy carefully removes bone, hair, and soft tissue samples for transport back to his hospital in Edmonton and to other laboratories around the world that specialize in DNA, bacteriological, biological, and trace element analysis. The search for lead and other elements in the samples will be time-consuming and complex. This combined information is essential in Beattie's search for verification that lead poisoning did indeed play a part in the disaster which engulfed the entire expedition.
We have to let this thaw, so that we can see this properly.
With so much going on, the team almost missed the signal when Keena's customary whine suddenly became an hysterical bark. A polar bear had wandered into the middle of camp and was nose to nose with the terrified dog. The bear was distracted from killing Keena and ransacking the tents by repeated gunshots in the air. The team has less than 5 days to finish their scientific investigation of both bodies. But the bear episode does serve to remind everyone that they could use a break after 18 hours of non-stop activity.
Well, how's your sandwich?
Okay. We're going to have to put a longhouse tent on the end here just for an eating tent. That's a dog attacking the food.
Is that all? We had about 10 pounds of hamburger out there.
Yeah.
And the dog got into it. So
She's eating well.
That was the end of that.
You can see you've got a salvage edge down here, meaning that's the edge of the fabric when it's woven.
During her detailed examination of the clothing, Barb Schwager identified the curious metallic object seen in the initial series of X-rays. It is a metal ring around which was woven a collar button.
Look at this button, Eric. It's very unusual. At least I have not seen one like that before. What they must have done is taken a ring, done needlework around it, sewing stitches, and then have literally woven a button, leaving open areas, just like women would do in white work or fancy work.
It almost looks spider web.
Yeah, it's really lovely. This is the button that Joe thought probably would be made out of ivory.
Like the modern day button.
Yeah, he looked closely to see if he thought it were bone or ivory, and that's the sort of thing we can tell in the laboratory, but it's hard to work with here. Did you see these initials, Eric, on the shirt?
Well, I saw them when I was in the coffee, but I haven't had a good look. It's almost...
I have a glass here, magnifying glass if you want, but it says TE 1844.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been speculating what they stand for. I would guess, and others have mentioned that possibly it's the person who made it. Initials of the seamstress.
Less than 2 years after the shirt was made, its owner sickened and died here, thousands of miles from his home. Donald Bray of Surrey, England, is a direct descendant of John Hartnell. One of Bray's most precious possessions is a letter written by Sarah Hartnell to her sons, John and Thomas, both able sailors on the Franklin expedition. Because she was ill, Sarah was concerned that she would not live to see her sons return. The letter was written almost a year after John's death.
Due to her heart condition and the anticipated length of the expeditions being away, she conceived it as unlikely she would ever meet them again. And she expresses herself on that subject quite poignantly. My dear children, I have great pleasure to have a chance to write to you. I hope you are both well.
I assure you I have many anxious hours about you, she continued, but endeavor to cast my cares on him who is too wise to err and too good to be unkind. If it is the Lord's will, may we be spared to meet on earth. If not, God grant that we may all meet around his throne. To praise him to all eternity are the prayers of your affectionate mother, Sarah Hartnell.
Four years ago, his brother was here, standing in the same spot.
Yeah.
John Hartnell was 25 and unmarried when he died. Thomas Hartnell would die less than 3 years after he threw the first handful of dirt and gravel on his brother's grave. For Thomas Hartnell, there would be no marker to commemorate his passing. After the reburial, Beattie and his colleagues take time to confer about the initial findings of Hartnell's radiological tests and autopsy. Evidence is pointing toward tuberculosis as the primary cause of death, a common ailment of the time. However, the extreme emaciation of the body is also a symptom typical of lead poisoning, as is the fact that there was no food in the stomach or intestinal tract, as though Hartnell would not or could not eat in his final days. Soon after the final clearing of William Brain's coffin, the research team makes a major discovery. An embossed copper plaque in the shape of a shield is attached to the lid. The inscription on the plaque confirms that William Brain was a Royal Marine of the 8th Company, Western Division, on the ship HMS Erebus. Died April 3, 1846, aged 33 years.
The upper part of Brain's grave showing the plaque.
It takes 8 hours of melting to expose the body of William Brain. The face is covered with a red kerchief made of cotton, possibly one of Brain's prized possessions.
Stubble there, look at the stubble. You need to be careful here. This is pretty delicate. There's a beard. Curly. Dark.
Trimmed on the chin.
Look at that bad tooth
Just
there.
let me check if it's frozen. Oh, looks all right.
An exposed pulp cavity in that tooth. Okay. Okay, here we go. Just loose down here. This is here. You got that?
Okay, it's frozen right here, so be
Okay, this is as
careful.
far as I can go. Oh, it looks like he's balding a bit. Look at that. Isn't that something? Look at the scar there.
It's amazing how well preserved the upper part is.
Well, let's see if we can get an idea of the clothing here. The button is not done up.
Is there any more?
And there's a sweater. There, U-shaped, and just like with Hartnell's, there's 3 pieces of clothing in the upper
Very
body.
similar. Just a little bit of freezing right here. Just a touch. Okay.
Oh, look at that hand. That is really well preserved. Okay, now where's the left arm? There, underneath him.
I think so.
Isn't that strange, though? There must have been enough room for him. So they had to tuck his arm underneath,
Perhaps.
possibly.
No pants.
Still hairs on the legs.
William Brain was a big man for his time, just under 6 feet tall, and his arm was twisted beneath him as though the sailors had trouble fitting him into his coffin. At death, Brain was extremely emaciated, weighing less than 90 pounds. The face is very discolored, suggesting that the body was kept on shipboard several days before burial.
You want to have
Come
him
down
roll
just
back?
a little bit now. I want to make sure we get
Maybe a
the
little
lateral
bit.
knee on there.
Notman is anxious to complete his x-rays as quickly as possible.
Tibia too? At least his limbs are flexible. It's going to help a great deal. He seems fairly stable too.
Well,
Just let go.
All I need is something underneath this part.
Here.
As he proceeds, the x-rays are clear and easily understandable, primarily because the body has much less internal ice and was not autopsied after death. Damage to one side of the body arouses suspicions that it may have been gnawed by rats. Not surprising at a time when rats on sailing ships were almost as numerous as sailors.
Okay. Exposing. On the picture over here on the left is a shot of the left knee. Over here, these 2 skull x-rays really show a big difference between Hartnell on the right and Brain on the left. We had a great deal of difficulty with Hartnell's skull initially because we could not penetrate the amount of ice that was inside. It's just one dense solid block of ice. With Brain, on the other hand, we could penetrate the skull and show the bony details almost immediately. This is an excellent technical picture. We'll be able to analyze that in greater detail under appropriate lighting conditions.
Again, this is absolutely standard autopsy technique. There's nothing new and exciting about it.
Do these show the same characteristics as Hartnell's?
Not yet, no. Characteristic I've seen on Hartnell's was calcification.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a sensation when you feel it, and these ones don't feel particularly hard yet. I would be actually somewhat surprised if he didn't have tuberculosis.
During the process of collection, a sample of intestinal flora was removed from William Brain's intestines. This bacteria, known as Clostridia, was later cultured successfully under laboratory conditions. Brain's stomach is devoid of food. Like Hartnell, his state of emaciation also conforms with high lead intake, although nothing conclusive can be determined until all trace element data is analyzed in a laboratory. While the plaque attached to Brain's coffin is a remarkable artifact, it too will be reburied. Eric Damjar contents himself with detailed tracings of its shape and engraving. William Brain is accorded the same respect in his reburial as John Hartnell. Born in Oak Hill, Somerset, William Brain was married in Greenwich. No record has been found of children from Brain's marriage, nor have any confirmed descendants come forward. His headboard epitaph was as stern as that of Hartnell. It reads, "Choose ye this day whom ye shall serve." Once the coffin has been covered, the research team begins the process of returning the gravesite to its original condition. When the stones and gravel have been relocated, there will be little sign of modern interference. It would take 2 years or more for all the bone, hair, and soft tissue samples gathered here to be fully analyzed and understood. From preliminary findings, the scientists have determined that both men suffered from severe tuberculosis and probably died from pneumonia. The levels of lead found in the bone of John Hartnell, as well as that of William Brain, were consistent with Owen Beattie's earlier findings in the case of Petty Officer John Torrington. The amount of lead was found to be 3 to 4 times higher than in normal modern human bone. Preliminary hair samples indicated lead levels ranging from 20 to 90 times current acceptable levels.
What is remarkable about this historical event is that you can apply the same forensic techniques to looking at unanswered historical problems as we do in looking at the modern forensic problems, in supplementing the work of historians and archaeologists with physical evidence that can support or suggest re-looking at events in the past. Franken expedition is one of these, where there was a mass disaster. It is a forensic problem in trying to determine the events that led to the disaster. And here's where the factor of lead comes in, that the lead itself has variable effects on the body as well as the mind. Even very subtle effects on the mind could have very important results. We just look at the decision-making process of the officers. We should look seriously at the implications of lead on the decision-making process.
In the end, Owen Beattie concluded that the cumulative effects of lead contaminating the food supply contributed to the final tragedy of the Franklin expedition. But was this case unique? There have been many unexplained deaths, disappearances, even stories of madness on Arctic explorations before and after Franklin's time. The hostile environment and vast distances of the Arctic would account for most of these incidents. But Beattie's investigation poses this question: could tinned food supplies have been involved in other nautical tragedies? Food supplies meant to sustain life, but carrying instead the seeds of disaster for iron men in wooden ships.
100 seamen he sailed away to the frozen ocean in the month of May to seek that passage around the pole where we poor sailors do sometimes go. In Baffin's Bay where the whalefish blow, the fate of Franklin no man may know. The fate of Franklin no tongue can tell, where Franklin and his sailors dwell.
For a transcript of this program, send $4 to Nova, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Please be sure to include the show title. Major funding for Nova is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. Additional funding was provided by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials. And by the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying healthcare products worldwide.